Teaching guidance part tip 1. Start with a smile. It's important to make eye contact with your students and smile as you greet them at the beginning of the lesson. Nonverbal communication, including facial expression, body language, and gesture, plays a key role in maintaining your relationship with the students in a class. It does not, as a popular myth would have it, convey 50% or more of the actual messages coming across in a conversation, but it's still important. Note, however, that the smile can also be overused. The recommendation to smile at the beginning of the lesson does not mean that you have to smile all the way through it. How much you do so, of course, depends largely on your own personality. Some of us are more smiley than others. But remember that, like constant, indiscriminate praise, smiles that are overused lose their impact. Use a smile to respond to a student's successful or amusing contribution, or together with a favorable comment at the end of an activity, to provide the class with a brief but welcome break from the effort of concentrating on serious learning tasks. Teaching guidance tip 2. Begin and end clearly. There should be a definite moment when the lesson begins, a dividing line between not lesson and lesson, and similarly there should be a clear point when it ends. So before you start, allow the student a couple of minutes to get organized. Sit down, take out any necessary books, pens, laptops, whatever. You'll need this time to get organized yourself. Get ready any materials or equipment you are going to need. Check attendance. Then give a clear signal that the lesson is beginning. This could be a simple verbal announcement like, "Okay, quiet please, we'll begin the lesson with." The same applies to the end of the lesson. You need a clear signal that the lesson is over. It's a good idea to do some kind of rounding off, a recap of what has been done, followed by a stock farewell phrase like, "Okay, see you on. Have a good day." Rituals can help a lot here. These are routine procedures that may or may not be meaningful in themselves, but function chiefly as attention-catching symbols of some event or transition. For example, in many countries, the national anthem is sung at the beginning or end of national events. In younger classes, the opening ritual may take the form of the writing of the date on the board, maybe a song or a chant. Teaching guidance tip 3. Give an advance overview. Particularly with teenage and adult groups, it's important to provide the class at the beginning with information about what's planned for the lesson. You can just tell your student what you are going to do, or have the program written up before you start, or write it up as you tell them. Some proponents of the learner-centered approach suggest that you should not pre-plan, but let the student take most of the decisions as to what happens in this lesson. I don't agree. Being learner-centered doesn't mean passing the responsibility for lesson planning to the students. The classroom is not a democracy, as it has often and rightly been said. Students would not learn very much if they had also to work on planning the content or process of lessons. And it is part of the teacher's professional responsibility to take these kinds of decisions. But you should also make such decisions clear to the students before implementing them. This is partly a matter of professional respect and consideration, and partly because, as discussed above, advanced organizer help create a sense of confidence and purpose. Teaching guidance tip 4. Teach new material first, review later. In principle, teach new or more difficult material early in the lesson, when students are at their freshest. Then go back and do a quick review of it at the end of the lesson, after you have spent time doing other things. Difficult texts or tasks usually need to be planned for early in the lesson, when students are likely to have more mental energy than later on. Similarly, new items are remembered better if they are taught first at the beginning of the lesson and then practiced at the later stage. In principle, we learn things best if we review them little and often rather than in one long, solid stretch. This is called the principle of distributed practice, as contrasted with massed practice. So if, for example, you have some new vocabulary to teach, do so for a few minutes at the beginning, then do other activities such as communicative tasks or reading comprehension in the main part of your lesson. Then come back to the new vocabulary at the end to do another 5-minute review. This will result in much better learning than if you had done a solid 10-minute session of vocabulary teaching at the beginning. But that isn't all. Distributed practice can be made even more effective if it's implemented using the principle of expanding rehearsal. This means that the first time you teach something new, you review it fairly soon after the first encounter, say later in the same lesson as suggested here. Then the next time widen the gap, so you might review again the following day or a couple of days later, whenever the next lesson takes place. Then perhaps wait 4 or 5 days until the next time, and then a week, then 2 or 3 weeks, and so on. Teaching guidance tip 5. Don't give homework at the end. If you know you have a homework assignment to give, explain it sometime in the middle of the lesson and make sure students have noted it down. Don't leave it until the last minute. In most lessons, I have observed the teacher gives the homework last thing before the end of the lesson. It seems to be a conventional routine in lessons in all subjects, not just English. I suppose there is a kind of logic to it. We finish the lesson, the next thing you'll do is homework, so let's give it when the lesson is over. But in fact, it's not a good idea for various reasons. Attention is likely in general to be lower at the end of the session. Students may be packing up and not listening to you. You may not have enough time to explain properly, and the overall message is likely to be homework is an afterthought, not so important. So it's much better to give it earlier In general, give the homework immediately after the lesson component that it related to. For example, comprehension work on a text you've been reading. Then you aren't rushed, can explain fully and answer question about it. And students have time to write it down. If you note it at the side of the board as you explain, then you can use this note as the basis for a brief reminder before closing the lesson later. Of course, there may be exceptions, as with any of the tips in the we mentioned. For example, the activity that's the basis for the homework might have come at the end of the lesson anyway, or the whole lesson might have been taken up with one ongoing activity with no gap when you could have given homework earlier.